Hello, welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm just doing my 14.24 high elo top lane tier list. So for your content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There are some important things to talk about this patch. We had the changes towards Ambessa, we had the changes towards Warwick, which then got hotfix nerfed, so there's some shifting around to be done there. We also saw buffs towards Rumble, which is obviously a pretty prominent high elo top lane pick. Riven got nerfed, she was deemed one of the best if you were a one-trick at the champion. Poppy got adjusted, and then I've got some other shifts around which I want to talk about. So let's get into the tier list. D tier is going to consist of the same champions. Your Trundles, your Yorick still both do underperform in high elo. They're unpopular, rightfully so. They really do struggle when people have a better understanding of macro, and thus they do sit at the back end of the D tier. Smolder is fading out of the top lane, which is good. This champion isn't particularly healthy when he is accessible as a good solo lane option. The nerfs towards his wave clear have really hurt him in some of the matchups which he was being picked in, particularly like your Cho'Gaths, your Cassantes, versus tanks where you could kind of freeze stack and scale in the lane. They aren't as anywhere near consistent. You're not gonna really want to play this champion anymore, and I believe that he's a solid bot lane option. You can, if you really do need to, flex it into the solo lanes if the bot lane matchup is really egregious. But in most cases, sort of gonna sit as a D tier pick, kind of fading out of the top lane now. Swain is going to maintain his spot within the D tier. He is losing his play rate as the patches go on, since he received his mini rework. The nerf to him this patch has definitely hurt him. He was already struggling as a top laner, especially in high elo. As for average play, he was an average pick. He's now sub average, but for high elo, not a pick I'm really going to recommend unless you have really good matchups for him. Primarily just your tanks, where he can kind of comfortably still lane and then scale up into being a really good mid-game control team fighter around objectives. But definitely a lot weaker in the top lane at the moment. I'm actually going to swap two champions around. I'm going to bring Cho'Gath up and Nasus down. So Nasus is going to drop down to the D tier. Ever since they nerfed the alternate playstyle of the E max Nasus, it really hurt him quite a bit in high elo, as that was a really good fallback playstyle when the lanes were really rough. Now that he just doesn't have access to that, Nasus is in a really rough spot for higher elo, and is just a pick which I'm really going to recommend avoiding unless you are able to pick him into specific matchups, like Kayle, for example. But then blind Kayle is incredibly rare. Outside of Kayle 1v9 and certain other Kayle 1 tricks in high elo, you're just not really going to see it. But Nasus dropping down to the D tier. Cho'Gath going to move up. I've played some Cho'Gath, and I've also seen other people play Cho'Gath, and it looks like he's doing a bit better at the moment. He's still obviously got the problems which Cho'Gath has of being telegraphed, slow, but some of the things which he has going for him are the low ult CD, the innate sustain he has through clearing the wave, and these can all be very valuable things, and actually makes him kind of strong mid game, and even laning phases. Cho'Gath can be pretty good if you're able to go an E max with Grass, for example. He can be quite oppressive in some of those lanes, so I think Cho'Gath does have a bit more room in the top lane. I still don't really like this pick, and he is still going to be one of the lower tanks which I recommend at the moment, but he moves up to the C tier. Kayle, obviously, going to remain in the C tier. She is very hard to pull off in high elo. I played against I played against someone who plays a lot of Kayle, and it just wasn't really hitting from what I experienced. Obviously, this is just personal experience of playing against some of these high elo players on their champions. I played against Spear Shot yesterday, and he demolished me on Pantheon, and I'm not a huge Pantheon fan. I think the champ's pretty weak at the moment, but then there are people who can make it work. So Kayle, if you can make it work, can definitely function in high elo. I am personally still not going to recommend this champion at the moment, as I do believe she has to be played very well to function in a lot of lanes, really utilizing your E rotations, and oftentimes Q max is a fallback into certain matchups where you can consistently land it, or you need it to clear the waves. I also really like Doran's ring start on her, but some people opt into other options. Sometimes you do need the other options, you might need the health, the AD, and the lifesteal from a Doran's blade, for example. But Doran's ring does give access to consistent more Ws, which can enable you to play some of those harder lanes, especially if you're going for a Q-max build. Time Kedge still struggles in high elo. Obviously, he's a very telegraphed tank. Most people understand the playstyle of the champion, and he's just a pick I'm not going to really recommend. Obviously, the AP build can have some merit as like being pretty deceptively strong, but it is a bit weaker now, and he does suffer from that. Udyr obviously got hit very hard and is definitely struggling a lot more as a top lane option, even though his build is in a really good spot. The unending Thimble into Spirit's trio of items, really elevating things like Maokai, but Udyr definitely struggling a lot more with the double R nerf. Sylas is a conditional counter pick. You oftentimes see it into like your Malphite and your Nars. In higher elo though, you can still really struggle in those matchups. Like even Malphite, for example, can win lane against Sylas just because of the harass with Q. Obviously, the ultimate can still be a very valuable tool, and I mean, it's still an incredibly valuable tool on Sylas, and that is primarily the reason why you are going to play it. But it's like a flex option, and yeah, Sylas sits above the D tier, but still, yeah, just a conditional counter pick. I'm not a huge Quinn fan. I think this champ's pretty weak at the moment. You can make it work, definitely. People won't play against it like at all. Like you might see this champ once a month, for example, and that can definitely like enable her to be a bit stronger. Garen's is doing a lot worse at the moment. He's a conditional counter pick for the most part, what he's been really relegated to. He still scales relatively well, especially if you're running things like your Phase Rush, for example, but definitely doing a lot worse at the moment, and has some really polarizing matchups. Things like Camille, for example, really rough in Garen's kind of matchup pool. Alawi, yeah, also doing really badly at the moment in high elo. The champion obviously has had actually a couple of base nerfs to her, which is unfortunate, because I think if Alawi was ever to function in high elo, then she would need some of those base values. But Alawi is an incredibly frustrating champion, so I'm not. I mean, I imagine a lot of people aren't really too bummed about not seeing Alawi. The champion has her problems, obviously, primarily just coming out as a counter pick into tank matchups is where you're really going to see her. But other than that, just not a pick I'm really going to recommend. Mordekaiser, relatively similar, can function a bit more into some of those tank matchups. Obviously, his isolation ultimate can be quite valuable. His AP damage is also quite nice, especially if you're looking for a bit of an easier bruiser top laner to play. But when things like Kennen and Aurora exist, you're just not playing Mordekaiser. Set still has his issues. He's still really struggling in the top lane. The nerfs to Stridebreaker really hurt him and Garen. And the one thing which really like prohibits him from being a D tier pick right now is because of his laning phase. If he had a weak laning phase, he would be a D tier option, but he can still function against certain picks. Obviously, Whipper played it at Worlds. That's always the one which I'm going to pick out, and it just looked terrible. And that's just set for you in high, just not a great pick. Pantheon, I've already done my piece on Pantheon. I'm not a fan of his champion. I think he's incredibly weak if you're not really heavily snowballing early game. If you're very, very confident you can get those advantages, you can make him work. Canoes is another Pantheon one trick. Someone actually I know a bit better. Does make it work. So and like consistently, like he has hit multiple accounts like High Master, close to like Grandmaster. So there is definitely strength to him, and obviously Spear Shot consistently hits challenges. So you can make Pantheon work. He does really require very like heavy aggression and like level 4, level 3 kills to work within the game. Skarner. Okay, so Skarner top, like, the data has always been good around Skarner top. I personally don't like this pick that much. Ever since they really nerfed his mana and his damage, he feels really lackluster to play as a tank top laner. He is conditional matchup-wise. Like, I'm really not going to recommend ever blinding Skarner top. He is a flex, like, option from jungle to top at best, but he can work here. Like you can still go the unending Thimble, like spirits. You're not as like tight to spirits as like certain other champs, but he's just not a pick I'm really going to recommend as a tank option at the moment. I think he is just too conditional, and that really prohibits him from being higher. Yasuo is a conditional option as well. Obviously, really good into range. We have seen Broken Blade play him a lot into range in competitive, and that has always been where Yasuo really does shine. He is a conditional flex pick. That is what he comes down to as a top lane option. Twisted Fate also isn't really played, and like some of the ranged options at the moment, like your Auroras, like your Kennens, like your Nars, Yasuo can still struggle into them, even though he should be primarily like able to kind of neutralize and use his wind wall effectively. Varus, Vayne are my two ranged options in the C tier. They can function into tank matchups, into champions which just don't really have good answers to their like their range and their burst or like I say burst, like their combo damage more than anything. In Varus's case, you can go like Bork, Kraken, Ginsu's Rush. We've seen variants of like on-hit Varus in the top lane, so you can definitely make him work. Obviously, Kerberos is going to be the recommendation for like Cho'Gath, Varus, Victor at the moment. Like Victor top is something I will talk about in a second, but it's kind of interesting. Vayne, obviously, I think Surti plays Vayne a bit, but I don't know if at the moment Surti's playing Vayne because Vayne is a bit weaker in her current state. Sion, Heimerdinger are two of my other picks in the C tier. In Sion's case, he's definitely not doing as well as he has done in the past for high-elo top lane, because Sion has been a functional tank for a decent while as like a high-elo option, and I still think he's pretty abusive as a laner, like the Q harass, the W harass, the E harass. Like he has like range for a melee champion, and his all-in isn't bad. I do also think he can function with different items like Titanic's Rush, Asterix is like an optional, Overlord's Bloodmail is like an optional, and then like Unending can still function well on him. Heart still looks to be pretty bait, and like Heart still does get worse the higher elo you go, so Sion does struggle a bit more. He kind of sits as a high C tier tank at the moment, but I think he is underrated, and people can definitely flex his runes and his builds a bit more to really make him function. Heimerdinger is a pretty niche champion. I haven't really faced against Heimerdinger in a while in the top lane specifically, but his burst traditionally has always been quite good. His wave clear is decent, and I can just give him like good high elo values, and I can definitely make him function a bit here, but he's really not being played outside of one trick, so if you're not a one trick, you're probably not really concerned about the placement of Heimerdinger. And then Mundo. Mundo's always been an interesting one, because Mundo can come out as a counter pick into specific matchups where they can't really ever kill him, and then he can kind of like scale up the lane. I think Kennen has always been a pretty notorious like good matchup for Mundo. I think Jax as well, if I remember correctly. Like Mundo has always been like an option that's like coming out as a counter pick in them, but he keeps being tagged, and that really does hurt his viability in high elo, and it's getting close to the point where I just really struggle to recommend this champion. I think just some of the other tank options are the best. I mean, if you're really going full meta, the only tank option which is really viable is Cassante at the moment. Even things like Ornn, for example, really do struggle against a lot of the matchup pool. But I'll talk about that in a second. What else we got? So Victor is the champion I'm going to have in the B tier. So I've been talking to Vigav2 and Kerberos quite a bit about the strengths of Victor, and like how the plus 15 shield on laning phase has really given him a lot more strength, and he can be quite an abusive laner. And this is very true. Like these are all very good things for Victor. There are loads of rune options. Well, I say loads of rune options. You're primarily like playing your summon Ares with your Mana Flow, Transcendent, Scorch, Shield Bash, Bone Plating. It's like your core build. Obviously into matchups where you can take it, things like Cut Down with Haste is really nice, so there's definitely strength to Victor. I think the longer lane does hurt him a bit, and I don't think he's quite as good in top lane as he is in mid lane, but he's viable. Like I would say he's a solid B tier option in his current state, and if you can make him work, he can definitely get you some LP. Rengar is primarily just played by OTPs. Even in the top lane, he's just not that popular anymore, which is unfortunate, because I think Rengar has really had a decline over the years, and without some sort of like mini reshape, I just don't think he's really ever going to pick up the play rate again. The buffs were nice, which he received in like 14.23 or 2. I can't remember off the top of my head, but he's still like, it's only OTPs playing him, but I still think he can function as a good B tier pick. His W is a really powerful ability for mitigating damage. He can be quite a good harass champion in laning phase if you're executing him well. If you're stuck under the tower, he's kind of useless and just not going to be a great addition to the top lane if you're not able to get good value out of the champion. Maokai is a pick which over time I've kind of like pushed him more and more up. I think he's definitely better than what I originally considered him as. I undervalued the buff more than anything. The 5 movement speed and 30 health really helped him in the top lane. It allows him to more consistently space, and it allows him to more consistently trade with a bit more HP. And I've been playing a lot of Maokai. Like Maokai is probably my most played on the current patches, like 23, 24. And I do think this champion can very much function into a lot of picks. Like even things like Riven, for example, like once you have some armor and you like get access to like Unending Despair, you can win that matchup. Obviously, Riven, incredibly dominant early game, and that can definitely be quite hard for Maokai. Maokai is very weak early on into the game. The Q doesn't do a huge amount of damage until you have points in it, and he lacks the real like fight back, and like he wants to sustain fight. That is the strength of Maokai. So once you get some items on him, he can be very strong. He struggles more into AP matchups. Like I would really recommend avoiding Rumble, for example, on Maokai. That matchup will just be unplayable for you. But into AD matchups where you can rush Unending Despair quite freely, he is very good. And I think I undervalued him as a tank. I'd say he's more like a high B tier, honestly close to A tier option. Wukong is more, I mean, is niche. He's a relatively niche top lane. Honestly, you could probably consider him a C tier pick, but I do definitely think there's strength to Wukong top. I think people just don't really want to play him. That's like the main thing. There are like build variants. We've seen like lethalities, we've seen like bruisers, hybrid tanks, and it allows them to function in different matchups with like Conqueror, Grasp, primarily those two keys. So obviously Electrocute is like very niche, you're not going to really see Electrocute Wukong, but the pick is fine. He's a good team, like Wukong's strength has always been his team fighting. He can still trade against some laners though, primarily just pick him into AD and you should be able to make him function. So I think he's an okay B tier pick. Galio. So Galio is a weird one. I think Galio could really flex his way around the top lane tier list. He's really good into AP. I really like playing Galio into AP. I think the champion has a lot of value. He's a great supportive tank for your team. He has really good base damage, and that can make him really valuable. He sucks into AD though. You cannot blind this champion for the life of you. If you play him into AD, you will be the sole reason you lose the game. He just can't fight back against a lot of those lanes because he struggles in sustained combat and relies on burst and the magic resist and his shield to really like mitigate that retardant potential. So he's a good B tier pick in the matchups where you can play him. Into other matchups where he does struggle considerably more. So you do just have to be cognitive of that. Malphite, pretty similar. Works really well into like AD compositions. You can't pick him if Sylas is open. If Sylas comes out, you will more often than not lose the game. But he still functions into some of the AP matchups. Like your Cannons and your Kells are playable with like a Malignance Rush. So there is definitely some strength to this champion, which I think people kind of undervalue. I don't think he's one of the best tanks in the game. I think he is a conditional tank still. I would have him in the B tier. I think Maokai is a bit more open than these two, but all three of them are good champions for your arsenal if you're allowing them to be flexed. If you blind the pick them, you will struggle a lot more. Ornn is more blind pickable than these options, though. I'd say Ornn's probably like... Ornn is a slight bit above Maokai. I mean... They're similar. I'd say they're relatively... they're next to each other, if anything. Ornn has some really bad matchups at the moment, and it really prohibits him from being higher up in the tier list. Just a lot of champions have parries or counter abilities to kind of avoid Ornn's all-in combo. But he's a great team fighter. He's a very powerful ultimate. He's really good scaling, and he's a good solid tank option. So there is still strength to Ornn. I'd just say he sits as more like a mid to high B tier option at the moment. Claire sits in the B tier. He's kind of like Wukong, very niche, but can be very oppressive if you know how to play the champion. Akali is an underrated top laner. I actually know some Akali top laners who like really think the champion's actually like good at the moment and can definitely be played into a lot of matchups. What I'm really focused on Akali at the moment is like the tank hybrid builds, like your Deadman's Abyssals and then some like variations of that. So I think you can make this champion work a lot at the moment, and I think she's actually a pretty good B tier option. So I'd actually have her as more like a high B tier pick in her current state. Azir is an underrated top laner, so much so that I don't even have him as one of the options, but I'm going to include him. Azir is like a champion I have a soft spot for. I think he's actually really good in the top lane and has just been kind of under the radar for a while. I know also know a decent amount of like people who actually do encourage Azir top, so it's good to see that happens. Some people are still aware of it, but it's underplayed. It's not really going to see play even when it's recommended. So good into tanks, good into Argot. That's the other one. Like obviously Azir makes that matchup unplayable. There are other ones, but yeah, that's the main gist of it. You can play him into matchups where you can free scale and be an incredibly good AP hyper carry later on into the game. Kind of like Ryze and Cassiopeia. I think these champions can all kind of linger next to each other. Ryze really good into short range compositions, kind of like Cassiopeia. Really good into Kennen as well. Like that's one of the matchups where you specifically see him being played into. Teemo probably drops down to the C tier, actually. I think I had Teemo slightly overvalued, and I think he should probably belong in the C tier. I still think he can make some matchups quite polarizing, but people space better, they understand the champion more, they all play more around his shrooms, and I think it just diminishes the value of Teemo a bit too much to really allow him to remain in the B tier. Vladimir, however, I still think can sit in the B tier. I think this champion can be really strong into specifically the Jax matchup. That is the one where I'd recommend he actually does get played more often than not. Like, Jax is still a relatively popular top laner, and Vlad is a good answer to that. Outside of that, I don't really know as many of the matchup tables for Vladimir. He's still a pretty niche top laner. Like, he's just going to come out as a counterpick to Jax more often than not. Urgot is fine. I think that's what I describe Urgot as. He's pretty bad into ranged compositions still. You're really going to, like, he's not a good blind pick by any means, but if your comfort is Urgot and you're playing into a lot of melees, he can still definitely have a lot of value. You're primarily just playing the Cleaver Shojin build at the moment, but I do definitely think this champion can work in a lot of situations. Phase Rush and PTA give him some rune options as well, so yeah, Urgot sits as like a good B tier pick. Singed is pretty unique. Obviously, primarily played by OTPs who understand the wave management and the like proxying value of Singed, and it kind of just how to play out team fights because he is very unique in the way he functions. Tryndamere is okay, so Tryndamere is an interesting one. I actually, I mean, I talked a lot to two Tryndamere players, and one of them is Vigar2, who obviously plays Tryndamere mid, and he can still function. Like, Tryndamere as just a solo laner is still a decent pick. He has good innate sustain, he has good damage, he scales well, he has very good wave clear, and I think all these strengths kind of are overlooked at the moment. I think Tryndamere is almost perceived as being worse than he actually is, so I do definitely think you can make this champion work at the moment. Jace, however, is an exclusive for like really, really good players at the champion. Obviously, this is the high elo tier list, but even some high elo players just cannot play Jace. Like, you have to be playing him so well to really make him work. That is the main gist with Jace. Like, if you can utilize his effective range of keystones and his spacing and his all-in harass potential, he is an excellent pick, and I do think he can work in like more compositions than like a lot of the other champions because of his like different playstyles. He is not a tank, he's not a bruiser, he's a skirmisher, and that does diminish his value at the moment, especially with his itemization, which just isn't as good as a lot of the other champions. Gangplank is underrated. I do think this champion should probably be in the 80 tier, but he just hasn't played a huge amount of the... you know, I'm going to have him in the 80 tier. I want to so badly. I will have it. Okay, I'll have him as a B+, like the highest B tier option at the moment. Gangplank is really good. He can be really oppressive in lane. He can scale really well. His builds give him a bit more durability than he's had in the past, and like over time they've kind of been allowing him to just be be more of what he used to be back when he used to be like the competitive mainstay. I honestly think Gangplank is close to competitive viability. The one problem with Gangplank though is he sucks into a lot of the ranged options. If you can't consistently barrel, you really have a hard time on this champion. So like Aurora, Kennen, Gnar being like popular, and at the top, I said Kennen's not popular. Kennen's a pretty mid-popularity champion for how good he is, and honestly, Aurora's not even that much popular, but like, they're good champions at the moment, and Gangplank can really struggle into the range of these champions, and he can struggle to, like, into like, a lot of overwhelm, especially if they do have tools or auto-resets to demolish barrels. Gwen has been elite skewed for a while, and it's probably just playing the tank matchups, but if you're comfortable playing Gwen, you can make her work into more than just tank matchups. Plus, she's a flex pick to jungle, so yeah, there's value to playing Gwen at the moment. Olaf, also a great anti-tank champion, pretty unpopular though at the moment, but can still work. Definitely got weaker with the nerfs he received and Strikebreaker nerfs, so he does sink down at the moment, but still works as a great anti-tank and CC option. So I do think he sits as like a high B2 option. I'm starting Gangplank above the both. Volibear is more of a mid B2 option. I'm honestly surprised I had him so high in the previous video. Like, having him as a high B2 option seems kind of weird, but he is a really good laner. He really can aggressively snowball lane and make it really hard for a lot of champions to play. And I think that's actually quite valuable at the moment. Plus his dives and his all-in durability, alternating builds can give him some value at the moment. So I do think he is a B tier champion. Maybe not high B tier though at the moment. And then Rumble. Does Rumble jump to the A tier with his buffs? Probably not. I don't think they are exactly what he needed. They are best in Elite though, so this is the elo bracket where he will feel those the most, where you are more consistently getting access to gold and you are that is the main thing. You get high elo is where you are getting the most gold in the game. Well, that's through kills, CSing better. It kind of varies, taking towers. So the ratio buffs really do help him here. Getting access to some more AP gives him durability on the W, gives him some more damage on the Q, and I do think he is a very high beta option. We'll maybe make the jump into A tier into the next video. It'd be interesting to see where he lands on like the B patch and the and going into next season. So, yeah, obviously lots of things change. So some champions might really vary. What else we got moving? So I'm going to leave the A tier off with Warwick. He got buffed. He was probably the best champion in the game. And he then got hotfix nerfed. And I think he does lose a lot of power. It was like a half nerf to the W buff. So it was pretty sizable. I don't think it suddenly makes him as where he was before. I still think he is slightly positive. So I am going to have him in the A tier. I do think I had him slightly undervalued as like a C tier. I think he probably should have been B tier. But I'm going to move him to a high A tier. If the data continues to look good, and like the changes, like not the direct numbers, but the threshold changes to the W were like the main like moving factor, then he should probably still remain in like as probably a close to S tier pick, but I'm gonna have him as an A tier pick at the moment. So Warwick, very oppressive laner, very oppressive laner. That is where his main strength lies. He will fall off like his slope is just like that. That is how Warwick falls off over the game. The longer the game goes on, the weaker you become. So player on your incredibly oppressive early game, running things like flash barrier, and just you should have success on this champion at the moment. Don't first time him in ranked. I did that. Didn't go well. Zac and Poppy are going to be my two tank picks with... Actually, I have Zac, Poppy, and Shen. Shen might drop down to the B tier. You know, I'll move Shen and Rumble around. I think Shen is a bit weaker than I had him. I had Shen as a tier tank. I think the matchups have definitely shifted a bit for him. He really struggles into Ambessa, and that is one of the more common picks at the moment. And I think for that, he does drop down to the B tier. Ambessa is weaker though, and that does mean something. So Shen is going to drop down to the B tier, but the matchup isn't going to be as egregious. It is still bad though. So the main things with Shen are you do have lots of variants of builds, like your Heart Steals, your Sunfires, your the other one, Hollow Radiance, the like supportive options as well. But he prints less shields, his R is weaker, and that has hurt him, so he does drop down to the B tier. The other two A tier picks then. So, Zac and Poppy. Poppy got adjusted this patch. She looks better with Cindered Sky. So if you're playing Cindered Sky Poppy, congratulations, your champion's better. She probably goes to a high A tier pick. If you weren't playing Cinder Sky Poppy, she probably drops down to the B tier. But I'm going to leave her here at the moment because Cinder Sky is her most popular build. So Bruiser Poppy looks to be good. I definitely recommend trying it. It's like Bruiser Tank hybrid. Zac still remains as an A tier option. He's definitely a lot weaker in like some of the matchups. So I think you could argue that maybe he should also be dropped down to the B tier, which is unfortunate. We're actually just consistently losing tanks to just being weaker. Like the only tank which has really risen quite a bit over this like split has been Maokai. Other than that, your staple tank is Cassante. That's it. And Cassante is the most popular top lane in the game, so that really feels quite bad. Zac, yeah, it is a bit weaker. The Q nerfs did hit him. He does struggle into certain lanes. If you can't pick up the W, he can't pick up the passive, he is going to hurt quite a bit. And then we have the string of the horsewoman. We have Camille, Aurelia, we have Riven, and we have Fiora. Riven I underrated. I think Riven was actually probably an S tier pick last patch. Riven's still obviously very reliant on being a main of the champion. If you main Riven, you were probably doing really well last patch. The 10 shield nerf is a slap on the wrist. She does drop to the A tier, I reckon, but she's still a really good pick, and if you're very comfortable with Riven, you're still going to play Riven. Fiora, conditional into tanks, but is incredibly good into those tank matchups, and can still function into a lot of the other matchups. You'll play against high-low Fioras, and they just won't let you breathe. They will permanently be on you. They will use their W, not just for like a parry ability, but for slow damage. She can be very oppressive. Camille and Aurelia are very similar. They can be very oppressive depending on the player you are playing against, and like the matchups. They do have bad matchup tables. Like some of these champions have been nerfed. Like Camille, Fiora's probably in one of the weakest spots she's been in. still really good in high elo. Camille is weaker because of her direct nerfs to her E, her W, and her passive, and her R. Well, actually, it wasn't her passive; it was her R. They took away the percentage maximum health damage from that, so she is a bit weaker. She does sink towards the low end of the A tier. And Aurelia received adjustments, but the fact that she gets access to passive damage on tower and maintains uptime on the passive and got the 10% AD ratio buff on Q has really helped her, and she does maintain her spot within the A tier. Obviously, the most common matchups for like Aurelia are Gnar, for example, so if you see Gnar, pick Aurelia into it. If you're comfortable on the champion, which I presume you are if you are playing Aurelia, then you should be relatively successful. Yone, Aatrox, Renekton, Darius all maintain their spots here. And honestly, Ambessa drops down from the S tier to the... do I want to drop Ambessa down? I'll talk about it in a second. So Yone, obviously, really good into Aatrox primarily. Could probably be... might arguably be droppable down to the B tier. Actually, I'm going to drop Yone down to the B tier. I think I overvalued Yone. Yone primarily just comes out as a counter pick to Darius and, not Darius, to Aatrox and tank matchups. That is mostly where you're going to see Yone. He is very good in most situations though, so I do think if you are playing him in, like, primarily only in most spots, he will feel like an A or an S tier champion. Outside of those, he will really struggle into a lot of the bruisers, especially like your Renektons and Pantheons, for example. Darius is still an incredibly oppressive high elo pick. Flash and Ghost can just allow this champion to run you in laning phase, and it can be very hard for a lot of picks to approach the wave. He could struggle mid-game, and he can struggle later on if he's not like decently ahead of the curve, but he is still very, very good, and very good like, as a very oppressive laner, especially if you're like alternating between Stridebreaker and Trinity Force builds. Renekton is still your staple top laner. He's great into Ambessa, and Ambessa is really popular at the moment, so that has really helped him. He does maintain his spots like a high A tier pick. He doesn't have... So, the thing with Renekton is, he relies on being good across the entire game for the most part now. He wants, like, for his early game, he wants to be able to consistently generate CS leads, neutralize enemy laner, and then be really oppressive at, like, level 6, 9, 11 spikes with his, like, Eclipse or his Cleaver, depending on what you're running within the game. And that is really, like, the strengths of Renekton. He does fall off compared to a lot of the other champions though, which is why he has to act as a body later on into the game, more than like, and like a body with point and click CC, rather than as like a damage bruiser, which a lot of the other champions are going, like bruisers are going to play as. Aatrox, I still think Aatrox is really good with the Shoshan Voltaic Psycho Sword build. He still struggles into some of the bruisers with high mobility. He is great into tanks though, and that can really be where you shine on Aatrox. So I think there is an argument that Yone should be next to Aatrox because they are very strong for what they do. But I think Yone does struggle a bit more at the moment. I think Aatrox is a really strong build which like elevates him in his current state. Ambessa. So I'm going to have Ambessa in the A tier. No, I'm not. I'm going to have Ambessa in the S tier. I'm going to keep it in the S tier. Ambessa got a lot weaker this patch. The W nerf was sizable, and that is very noticeable, especially in low elo. Not have it, like, losing durability is very low elo skewed. Like, the margin for error being lower on this champion has really hurt her. You're less consistently going to get away with making mistakes, and that is definitely going to punish you. In higher elo, it's still very noticeable. You're not going to be able to buffer or retaliate against specific things. The shield duration being lower means you have to be more snappy with it. The shield being smaller as well means it's going to get more consistently eaten through. So it was sizable, and I do think Ambessa is considerably weaker. There's a chance I drop it down to the A tier in the B patch. I'm kind of hesitant at the moment because she's obviously a relatively new release, and people are kind of discovering new tech and ways of playing her, and what she's good into as like the patches roll out, like come out, and like as the days move by. So yeah, I'm gonna leave her in the S tier at the moment, but she could probably drop down to the A tier. The other champions in the S tier are still your Jaxes, who is still an incredibly good anti-auto attacker champion. If you're utilizing the full extent of his pick, he is incredibly oppressive. He's a good laner, he's a good scaler, not quite as good as he was in the past, but he can still function very well in those situations. He can flank really nicely. He can he's great neutralizer and great split pusher. Like, there's so many values to Jax which really make him quite strong. His biggest weakness is Gragas, who is still within the S tier. Gragas is a great neutralizer. He has so much damage, like almost based. I mean, it's kind of base damage within his kit, and that can enable him to like play out a lot of lanes. His main concern is his mana cost, which is why he oftentimes has to opt into like chapter items, rower, tier, stuff like that to like really be able to function as what he wants to be within the lane, and that is what prohibits him from being like one of the best top laners in the game. I still think he is one of the best top laners in the game mode, but like the best, I guess you could say. But yeah, if you pick him into like a lot of the bruisers, you will just neutralize them and oftentimes have more value in team fights. He does struggle a bit more onto range, especially if you can't get to them. But like things like flashy body slam with like R for displacement and bringing them into allies can all be all you need to really like kind of turn the lane and make it favorable for you. Especially if you get access to like rower, you're able to sustain through them, or you're able to just harass them with Q. Maybe they don't have the mobility. He can function really well with those. Kennen is incredibly underrated at the moment. I think Kennen is genuinely one of the best top laners in the game in his current state. He wins so many of the good matchups at the moment. He does so much damage. He's great team fighting. He's great harassing lane. Like E-start on Kennen is basically untradeable against. Like there are so many things going well for this champion at the moment, and I think he is really underrated in his current state. No, K'Sante, wrap up the S tier. K'Sante is the best tank in the game, great early game, relatively weak later on into the game compared to a lot of the other tanks, but games go shorter in high elo. K'Sante benefits from that. So K'Sante, the premier elite tank pick, he is the most popular champion in the top lane at the moment in Elite. So people understand that. I hope he gets nerfed or adjusted. This current iteration of K'Sante I think is the worst and like least healthy for the game. I should just say least healthy for the game. He's not the worst. He's probably the strongest if anything. So yeah, K'Sante going to be in the S tier. He is an incredibly oppressive tank laner and really functions quite well mid-game as well. And Aurora maintains her spot in the S+ tier. I said she would get nerfed last patch. I was wrong. She didn't get nerfed, and she still is incredibly good. Like, Aurora will beat most top laners in the game with just the fact that she can outspace them, she can out-harass them, her base damage is high, her Q is a low CD for like what it gives, like what it allows her, like the damage it allows her to do. Her ult is an incredibly powerful tool. The passive being lost off the movement, like the passive movement speed being lost off, the movement speed being lost off passive did hurt her. It hurts her ability to kite. She still has it through W though. Like, she still has the safety net which she wants to function as a top laner, and she's incredibly good for it. So Aurora is still going to be my premier pick in the top lane. I think this champion should be nerfed in the B patch at least. It will be frustrating to play a month, or I say a month, like 15 days with this champion being the best option you can go to. It's going to be actually more like 20 days or something, because the patch isn't going to be until like some of the earlier days on January. So that's unfortunate, but yeah, Aurora gonna be the premier pick of the patch. I think K'Sante is your go-to option if you are playing tanks. Kennen, great ranged options. Gragas is a great answer to a lot of the picks. Same goes for Jax. I think Ambessa's a bit more, Ambessa and Warwick are a bit more up in the air. I think these two champions might jump or move going into the B patch, depending on like how the next following days go. So just be aware of that. But yeah, those are my thoughts. So thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.